I made the mistake of putting my attention down beneath me, and I just experienced this terrifying black pit. It was an endless nothingness beneath me. Suddenly, from above, I felt this very strong hand grab me by the wrist and say to me, "You don't want to go that way." And he started to pull me up very, very fast. The most powerful thing I remember of that moment was that for that little period of time, I was actually joined with him, and I could sense what he sensed, and I could see what he saw. And that is the most incredible thing I have ever encountered. Certainly, I am 65 years of age. I am a Christian. I've been a Christian most of my life. I work as a university lecturer in the field of media, film and television. I have 5 children, and it's been an interesting life. Sure, look, I'll start a little bit before the first day. It was a build-up of symptoms. I was experiencing chest pain, and I went to see the doctor and asked the doctor, "What is this chest pain?" I was worried it might be something to do with my heart, so I asked the doctor to run some tests, which they did. We ran some ECG tests on my heart, and she just said to me, "Go home and relax and don't do anything too strenuous. Just take it easy and wait until the results come back." So I did. I went home and was being careful with myself. But after about a week, I started to feel better. Although I still had a little bit of pain, I started to feel better, and I thought, "Oh, I don't think this is anything to do with my heart. This is just some lung infection or some other thing that I had that was causing a bit of pain." So I looked out, and my garden was very overgrown. So I thought I'd better go out and do some work in the garden. So I have a line trimmer machine, which I was trying to start out in the yard, and it just would not start. It just would not start. So I was pulling on the cord, trying to get this machine to work. And as I was doing that, suddenly, bang, I had this very severe cramp across my chest with big pain. And I knew immediately this was a heart attack. And as this was happening, let me just explain first, I was alone. Nobody else was there. I was alone in the house. So it was a dangerous situation. And as this was happening, I was standing out in the yard. I heard a voice, a loud voice speak to me. I still don't know if it was an audible voice or if it was just inside my head. But the voice just said to me, "You are going to die, but there are things that I have for you to do." And this confused me a little. I was just standing there thinking, wow, what is it if I'm going to die? How can there be things for me to do? So I just stood there and sort of said, "What do you mean by this? What are you trying to tell me?" And this voice, which I know to be God, this voice just said to me, "Go inside, call an ambulance, pack a bag, and be ready to go." So I did that, and went inside and called an ambulance, and they arrived within probably 10 minutes, I guess. They didn't take long to arrive. I was still experiencing chest pain, but I was able to do basic things like pack a bag and get ready. And they arrived, and they treated me with nitroglycerol and morphine and put me into the ambulance, and we took off for the hospital. And while we were on our way to the hospital, the young ambulance operator said, "I have to give you some more morphine and nitroglycerol. This is the way we usually treat heart symptoms." So they did that, and straight after they injected me with the morphine, I just said to them, "I'm going to pass out. I can feel it. I'm going to go." And then I got dizzy, and suddenly I was gone. That was it. I was in blackness and darkness. I have passed out before. I have fainted before in my life, and this felt totally different. This was nothing like just passing out. I was very much aware. but I was in total blackness, in total darkness. And I was just floating along in this darkness. And it felt quite dreamy and quite pleasant, as if I was sort of in a bit of a dream state. And I wasn't really sure what was happening, but as I was floating along, I started to think about things, and I thought, I think I may have died. And along with this realization came fear. And I started to become afraid. And as I became afraid, I started to drift down. I had this sensation of drifting down. And I felt quite disturbed by this, because I didn't particularly want to be drifting down. And I made the mistake of putting my attention down beneath me, and I just experienced this terrifying black pit. It was an endless nothingness beneath me that I just really did not want to head off down into that direction. So I was more afraid after doing that, which made me drift down further. Being afraid seemed to be the thing that was pulling me down. So in that state of anxiety, I just cried out and I said, Jesus, help me. With all my strength, I just screamed out. Not that I was actually screaming, I was in a spiritual state. But it was just, everything within me was calling out, Jesus, help me. As I just continued to drift downwards. And then suddenly from above, I felt this very strong hand grab me by the wrist and say to me, you don't want to go that way. And he started to pull me up very, very fast. It was an amazing experience. I was being lifted very, very quickly, and things were blurring past me and flashing past me. It was a bit like, I don't know if you've seen Star Trek, but a bit like going into warp speed in Star Trek or one of those science fiction movies, because everything was just flashing past me too quickly to even know what it was. And he continued to pull me upward and lift me higher. And we were doing this for some time. It felt like a couple of minutes. We were just flying upward at an incredible rate. And then eventually we just came to rest and were still. And I adjusted to where I was in a new environment, and there was a beautiful, cloudy, misty sort of environment that was glowing with this light. And I could see the one who had come to get me was there. And there was also probably half a dozen others that were angels standing around. So in like a semicircle standing around me. And at this point, this was the first point at which I actually had a chance to stop and evaluate how I was feeling, because it had all happened so quickly. And my experience there was one of incredible love. This is the only way I can explain it. It was love to a greater dimension than I've ever experienced in my lifetime. It was such a beautiful experience. It filled me up. I felt like I was going to explode with it. It was just so powerful and so beautiful and so good. It reminded me of when I was a very little child and my mother would hold me, and just those memories of being loved to that extent. But multiply that by 100, it was an enormous sense of love and well-being. And I just felt I'm home. That was the feeling I had. I belong here. I'm at home. This is where I should be. This is where I should have been all my life. And it was a really wonderful sensation. Is there anything else you want to ask me at this point?
Yes, that was an amazing experience. I do want to ask that when you were drifting down and you started to feel anxiety and the void inside you, do you think the feeling was somehow related to hell?
I suspect so. I didn't see any fiery flames or red devils or anything like that, but I knew I was afraid of what was down there. And it felt to me like absolute nothing, absolute void, nothing. And it felt endless. It felt like there was just no bottom to it, that it was a non-existence. And that did make me very afraid, because I certainly didn't want to go down that way. Hell, I'm not sure if I would know if it was hell or not, but it certainly had that sort of feeling to it. Yes, I think it's not quite as clear cut as many church priests over the years, and going right back to Dante, who wrote about hell. I mean, I think they've come up with this concept of hell that isn't quite accurate to what is written in the Bible, and certainly not accurate to what I experienced. More of a place of non-existence, just a place of death and nothingness, a place of no life. That's how it felt. Yeah. Now, when we say conversation, it's important to point out that there was no words like we're speaking now. It was, I could hear every thought they were thinking. So I was there with them, and I was just looking around at these angels, and firstly, they looked amazing. They just looked very tall and very, very wise. I don't know if someone can look wise, but these angels did look wise, and they looked as if they knew so much. And I felt very small, not only physically small in their presence, but small mentally as well, and just felt like I am like an infant, like a baby in front of these beings. They are so much more advanced than I am. So I basically just started to ask questions about where am I, what's happening, and the one who came to get me started to talk to me and say, we've come out to meet you. And he said, you've got to make a choice whether you will continue on with us and go into paradise and stay there forever, or whether you will return to your life on earth. And he gave me the choice. He said, if you want to come on now and end your life on earth and come to paradise, you can, and we will take you through. But if you do want to go back, we will do that as well. So you need to have a think about it and choose which way you would like to go. Now, at that time, I had, children. I had one daughter who had been hit by a car, and she had severe brain injury, and I just didn't feel I could go away and leave my children at that point. My youngest child was still only 8 years old. So I thought, no, I really do need to go back, as much as I did not want to. Now, the reason I did not want to go back was that it was just so good. It was so beautiful there. The feeling was like nothing I can really fully describe. It was such a wonderful feeling. I could feel the presence of my relatives that had passed on. I could feel a feeling as if it was my extended family. I felt like I was at a family reunion, and it was a very welcoming, warm, and beautiful feeling. I didn't really want to go back to life on earth as such. It was more out of a sense of obligation to my children. And I decided, no, I think I need to go back. And then I just looked at the one who'd come to get me, and I said, who are you? And he said, I'm the one you call Lord. And for me, that's Jesus, no other. And so I realized I was literally in the presence of Jesus, and I could feel his power and his amazing spiritual existence that was just beyond anything I could comprehend at all. And while we were there, he said to me, you've been through a lot. As I said, one of my children had been hit by a car and had severe brain damage, and I had a lot of grief within me. And he said, I need to come into you and to do some healing within you. So I said, sure, please do anything you want to do for me. I'm very, very happy for that to happen. So at this point, it was as if his soul entered into my soul, and I could feel him come within me and start to rearrange things within me. I could feel grief, I could feel sadness and anger and all these things being manipulated and changed and fixed up. And it was an amazing experience. The most powerful thing I remember of that moment was that for that little period of time, I was actually joined with him. And I could sense what he sensed, and I could see what he saw. And that is the most incredible thing I have ever encountered, because for that little moment of time, I was aware of everything. I was aware of the whole universe, the whole multiverse. It was as if I could look under a rock in Africa and see what was there. It was like I could look in someone's lounge room in America, or somebody's garden in Vietnam. I could see everything. I knew everything at once. And I understand what Jesus is and how immense and powerful he is, that he can be aware of all things at the same time. And I never understood that until that moment, that just how important that is and how powerful that is, that he is a being way beyond what we can understand, who has knowledge of all things at all time. That was a very special time, actually, because when she was hit by a car, she was in a coma for 3 months, not moving, totally unconscious. And then when this happened, actually, she could communicate. I should explain. She could communicate, but only with one hand. She couldn't speak. She was very, very brain injured. So she could get her meanings across with one hand and with facial expressions, but she couldn't use many words, just 1 or 2 words. But when I told her about what had happened to me and how I met with Jesus and an angel, she started pointing to herself. And she just kept on pointing to herself and getting very excited. And I said, "What, Rebecca, have you experienced this same thing?" And she would say no was pointing down, up was yes. And she started pointing up and pointing up. So I realized, and I said, you've experienced the same thing, haven't you? And she was, yes. So I knew at that time that she had, while she was unconscious and while she was in that coma, she had also experienced something similar and been to a heavenly realm and met Jesus, met angels, and the same sort of experience I have had. So as she was on her deathbed and she was passing away, and there was not much we could do. This was, I don't know if you remember the swine flu in 2009. Because of her condition, she was very, very rapidly hit by the swine flu, and it killed her within a few days. But as she was about to pass away, I was able to sit with her and just say, "Rebecca, you and I both know what's going to happen to you after death. We know where you're going, so you don't need to be afraid. You don't need to be afraid. We know you're going to be with Jesus." And it calmed her down, and I could see the look on her face, and she was at peace with it all. And it was rather beautiful to be able to have that moment with her, that moment of understanding and knowing that death is not the end, and that there's something really good waiting for her beyond that. Look, God deeply, deeply loves all human beings. We are all his creation. And this is something that I understand now that I didn't fully understand before, was that we are all joined. We are all part of one big family, which is God's family. And his love for us is profound, and it's deeper than anything we can imagine. And I think it's not until we hit that point of death that full realization of who and what God is actually hits us. He wants us to be with him. He wants us to be worshipping him. He wants us to be thinking of him, communicating with him, and listening to him, and having him in our lives. Now, for me, that comes through Jesus. That's the promise Jesus made, that he would be with us. He says, "I will be with you to the end of the age, always." And I absolutely believe that. And that's been my experience, that Jesus does stay with us and care for us and love us. And at the core, what you picked up on, forgiveness, that God will forgive us if we ask for forgiveness. If we go to God and say, "God, wash away the things I do wrong. God, forgive me for what I've done wrong and help me to live a better life." And that's a very powerful and important message. And I think if there's any one message, that is the message I would like to give, is that Jesus loves people and wants them to be washed clean and forgiven.